Good afternoon from beautiful Brisbane, Australia. I know normally I'm on in the morning, but hey, there's a change up. So I wanted to come and share some information with you this afternoon because I've been asked some questions by another professional and they're in relation to my story. And my story isn't something that I normally talk a lot about because I'm busy helping everybody else, but also I I just don't, and it's not for any particular reason. I don't hold back. It's just, yeah, it's been a progressive thing. So I thought I'd answer her questions, which will also give you some background into what happened with me, and we'll go from there. So she asks, how was my physical condition officially diagnosed, or was it? My physical condition wasn't officially diagnosed as complex PTSD or complex trauma because that diagnosis isn't available, especially certainly not in Australia at this point in time, unless you go through a whole string of events, professionals, you've got to find the right professional, etc., etc. What happened for me was quite the opposite. So I lost all my cognitive function. So I couldn't walk on my own. I couldn't talk. I couldn't do anything for myself. I lost all my memory, even how to do the most basic things, lost language. So I couldn't even form words because I couldn't access the words in my brain. In my storage center in my brain, I had no access to them. I had grand mal seizures, which I'd never had in my life, ever. Um, what else? Yeah, basically, down to a full-time carer. I could not take care of myself. And I was bedridden for 2.5 years. No one had answers, and I mean no one. The one specialist we did see was a neurologist because I was having these grand mal seizures and I shouldn't be having them. And she said, "You're over medicated." So that was a blessing, and I got sent to the local, I don't know what you call it, mental health ward, and basically I had a grand mal seizure in there, and they were happening every third day, and even though I couldn't talk, they said, "You don't belong in here," and sent me out and were changing my medications, and I couldn't talk at the time and say, I need you to put me back on Tegretol because that's what I'd been on since I was 15. At that stage, I got small seizures, but these grand mal seizures were something that I'd never had. So I couldn't say that, and they put me on the wrong medication. So it was a very frustrating another 12 months after that. So till I could talk, and then I went back to the neurologist and I said, "Please put me back on my own medication." She said yes, and she said, "I don't think I'll ever see you again," and she hasn't. And that was possibly over 12 years ago that happened. Now, 11 years ago, I began to realise that no one was going to help me. Then husband wanted me to sue, and I wouldn't because I knew that in order to sue, I'd have to remain in the same condition for another 5 years at least. And I wasn't prepared to do that. I wanted my life back. And fortunately, I began to get out of bed and, prayed like crazy I wouldn't fall over when no one was home, because if I did, I didn't know how I was going to get back up. So I hugged the wall and the furniture and everything out to my computer at that time and discovered Facebook. And because I could take my time writing and I could use a thesaurus to look up words and things like that, I began to get language back in my mind, even if I couldn't say the words yet. So that was okay. And then the time that I made it up and down the hallway 4 times, I was like, I'm going to make it through. If you'd said to me it would take, 11 years to get here to where I am now, I probably would have run in the other direction because it's a long journey. And through it all, no one could tell me what was wrong. Because I'm a strong person, they'd say, "Oh, you'll be fine. You'll get over it. You'll be fine." But I also didn't have the language to let people know exactly what was happening internally for me either. And that made it challenging. one of the things I came across along the journey was the term ABI, acquired brain injury. And I matched everything for that. And I went, oh, well, I've got a brain injury. I've just got to work to get better. And so along the way, I did a lot of things to help my brain become well. So doing brain training online was one of my things that I did the year I studied, well, year and a half, I studied for my counselling diploma. And it was just being prepared to keep pushing through with the process that I was able to become more well, increasingly more well. And, you know, things like this year, I developed trauma-informed movement. And that helped because I learned through all my training to be a complex trauma coach about the brain. And once I learned about the brain, I put together pieces and went, oh my goodness, I just need to get this part of the brain back online and I'm going to begin to get more well. Because unless we can get our brain well, we can't process what's happening in our nervous system. So we do have things like polyvagal theory, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But if I can't process what's happening for me emotionally, which I need my prefrontal cortex for, then I'm just going to be stuck anyhow. I'm going to go around and around internally because I'm not able to put the emotions into an order, and I needed them in order to process them. So no, there was no official diagnosis. One, because I had no language to say what's happening inside of me and what I can and can't do. I just did not have that at all. But when I started studying complex trauma, I just burst into tears and said, finally, something makes sense in my life. Okay. But I had done a lot of years of study before that around the family and family dynamics and toxic families and so on, and just lots of stuff. Think back to John Bradshaw days, PMLity with codependence. I did all that work years ago, but until I had all the elements of complex trauma to put together, I just couldn't become increasingly more well. I couldn't even get my fitness up until I understood what was happening at an unconscious level in the brain. See, if we don't know what we don't know, then how are we going to address it? It wasn't until I learned that the unconscious part of me kept hitting the safety mechanism in my brain that I could then develop an awareness of it. And then it wasn't until I learnt through extra training about how that alarm system says, be afraid, everything's unmanageable, that I turned it around and said, okay, if that's what my brain on an unconscious level is saying, then I need to be able to teach my brain, because it's an absolutely brilliant organism, obviously, but I had to be willing to teach my brain to stop, and I can manage this. And we create new neural pathways when we change things up. So consequently, where once I was crippled with anxiety, I have used so many strategies to overcome the complex trauma. And I'm on the road to doing that, which I'm so grateful for. So not a formal diagnosis, because no one could do that at that time. And I did see, let me think, possibly 3 or 4 years ago, I actually went and saw a psychologist who is she was trained in all things brain. So she even studied overseas and was on the ball, and even she didn't know. I said to her, look, there's still something wrong. I know I'm put together as who I am, but there is still something wrong internally with me, and I don't know what it is. So I saw her on and off over 10 months, hoping that she'd have answers. But at the end of it, I fit all the criteria for Asperger's, and she said, no way. And then she tested me and she said, oh yeah, there's no doubt that you are. And see, all of this stuff happens internally, And it's not till we have the language that we begin to go, right, now I can address it. So I know that was a really long answer. And then she asked, how do I view my diagnosis now? Spot on. Absolutely everything I needed to know was contained in that diagnosis, because the more I study it, the more I understand it, the more I am able to put together strategies, and the more well I am able to become. And the more I understand why, when I went and I tried to work a normal job for 10 days, and then I was sick for 3 months. And I totally understand why that was. It will never happen for me. I will never be in a normal work environment. It's just not possible. It's cognitive overload for me. So what I'm doing for me is the best thing. And they've asked, to my knowledge, does it have anything to do with environmental health issues such as mold, indoor air problems, and chemicals such as perfumes or pesticides, or other contradictory conditions such as ME, CFS, chronic something, borreliosis? I've not heard of that. Pain syndromes, etc. That is, if you've recovered mostly by healing trauma, does the physical situation still have some other components, influences to it, or do you view it as simply trauma-based reaction? For me, it is trauma, complex trauma. Now, for me, it's none of those other things, because mine goes back generations. And at the moment, science has proven the generations through the mother. So when high levels of cortisol cross the placenta because the mother has unresolved trauma, then the impact on the child is down to the cellular level. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but when I carried my 3 children, I had unresolved trauma and I had no idea. And when I carried my first child, I certainly had no idea. And it wasn't until after he was born and my mum was dying of breast cancer, secondary liver, that she actually told me about the issues with her mother. And I went, oh my goodness. So when my mother carried me, she had unresolved issues. And now my grandmother would have had unresolved issues because her mother, my great-grandmother, left 4 girls in the middle of nowhere and ran off. Okay, can you imagine that? I can't. It would just be horrendous for them. So when generation after generation after generation unresolved trauma is getting passed down, then it's going to show up somewhere. And all 3 of my children are on the spectrum, and all 3 have had different mental health challenges. And then what happens is, and I really fully believe this, I know it's not scientific yet, but I absolutely am convinced too that it comes down the male side as well. And I say this because I look back at the family patterns and the amount of addiction and divorces that go back multiple generations in my family. It's got to have had an impact. So when you go back to my father, he's been married and divorced 5 times. My brother has drug and alcohol problems. Go back to my father's mother, and she was left in a girls' home or an orphanage while her mother went to work because her father was an alcoholic, last heard of in far north Queensland in a ditch, drunk. And, obviously he's deceased now. And so these things just don't turn up out of nowhere. And I really believe that at some point science will also pinpoint what happens the paternal side as well. So first of all, there's the generational trauma that gets passed on in the cellular level. And then for me, there was two different types of trauma in my personal life. So there was abandonment trauma, okay? My family was there one day and gone, no, yeah, there one day and gone the next. So I had my mother, my father, and my brother, and I all lived together. And then one day I'm at my grandparents, and my mum was, and they were all gone for weeks, okay? And I would have been either 3 or 4, probably 4. And back in those days, there was no language, no one discussed anything. And so my whole body held on to that. And then some years after that, when my father left home for good, I froze, because my greatest fear was, and it took me decades to understand why I never cried when he left, was because I froze, worried that my mum was going to leave too, because that's all I knew, is that the family left. Okay? So it's, the body holds it all inside. Okay? And we have to know the language, have an education about it. We have to be willing to go in and touch the terror, so to speak, and fill in the gaps as well. And then the sexual abuse, it had a whole different impact on my life again. And it also has an impact that goes from the brain, the trauma, the nervous system. It also goes down into soul level and spiritual level stuff, where that has to be addressed in order to be whole and healthy. So for me, the whole diagnosis of complex trauma is just nailed it. And I went, okay, that's it for me. Hi, Laurel, you should be asleep. So I just had to get all that out. So people who have environmental impact and it's causing them brain trauma as well, I would say absolutely, with the medical trauma and everything, deal with the trauma, strengthen the nervous system. I don't have any clue about environmental impact stuff, but if there's trauma involved that's impacting the brain, then we can definitely, for everything I've done, and start with breath work if you have to, begin to get well. Laurel says, I was abandoned at 13 years old in a basement apartment in New York City after a social worker confronted my mother about years of childhood abuse. Oh my goodness, Laurel, I'm so sorry. That would have been so hard for you. Oh my goodness. And you know what the hard part is our body keeps carrying this around until we deal with it. And what we don't actually know, or no one tells us about, is that when the pain comes up, it is non-verbal as well. It is painful as all get out. It really is. When it happened to me, I was glad I was able to say, I know who I am as an adult, because it's that painful that if I didn't know who I am, the pain would have sent me, I would have lost my mind permanently, because that's how painful it was to feel. So I had to be able to trust that I could let go and process it. So, and it's not something you do on your own. My nearly 21-year-old was with me, and when the electricity runs through your body, it's just sheer agony. But eventually, it took about 24 hours to all the pain to be gone. But yeah, I did it. And it's not something you can go, oh, I'm going off for a weekend retreat and I'm going to deal with that. No, it doesn't work like that. I actually was on top of the world, happy as, forging ahead. This is the night before and I'm going to do this, this and this the next day. And then I got triggered because I went, oh, I've got to do something for my daughter. And that absolutely flipped me out because it wasn't part of my plan, but I still went to sleep and I woke up. And it happens when our whole being knows that we're ready and that we can handle it and manage it. So we just have to keep going and building our strength. And that's one of the primary things, is we've got to be prepared to build our strength in a whole manner, not as in an ego-driven manner, I'm strong, I can cope with this. For me, especially my faith, I wouldn't have been able to do it without my faith. You just can't. You couldn't, yeah. I definitely would have lost my mind. Oh, Laurel, you need to do something about the insomnia. It's not good for you. So, yeah, I hope that helps explain a bit of it. It was a long journey. It's still a little bit ongoing, but for the most part, I'm good. And as I still learn more language around it and learn and understand about the pain and the terror, I'm at that place where now I can face the terror, feel the terror, and go, okay, let's do this. You know, as I say to the girls, let's get our brave on, you know, and we can do this. And we do it in a manner that honours our journey as well, honours our process of where we're at. Sometimes we don't get the whole brave on, we just get a bit on. And that's okay. But the most important, there's two things that you'll do during this process. One, reach out and open your heart and encourage others. That's where I started, and it was the best thing I ever did, because it makes us know that we can have these experiences of connecting even globally across the world via Facebook, and we're safe, okay? So when I first sat down at the computer to just, you know, get on Facebook, I couldn't even hit the like button because I was terrified people would come through the computer at me. And we can all laugh now and go, yeah, right. But at that time, I'd had everything stripped from me, everything. Everything that I thought was good and right and true had been taken away from me. So, of course, I'm going to be terrified stepping out into the world. Then, you know, to actually talk to somebody online, that scared the living daylights out of me as well. It was like, oh my goodness, you know, are they going to want to take from me? And that happens so much in our life, that people want to take. And we have to do a lot of work towards it. And the second thing is, we need to do a lot of our work with a professional, because we need that safe interpersonal relationship. We need that safe relationship that we can bounce things off, and we know that no matter what, they're there for us and they're with us and we're safe. But it's not an unhealthy attachment. Otherwise, we go back out into the world and repeat the same relationship mistakes that we've done before, and none of us want to do that. None of us. You know, I was working with a client, they're in another country, and it was so good to have them bounce ideas, and we put strategies together, and then they've been able to healthily navigate new friendships and new relationships. And let's face it, in this world, that's what we've got to do, because we seem to be the generation that's had everything stripped from us, in order that we can create the new way forward for those of us who've had complex trauma, and have it. And, you know, I say to everybody, look, the end result is that those of us that continue to push the uncomfortable comfort zone, so we don't get comfortable, we sit with the uncomfortable, we go, what's our one next step? We still will have those mechanisms go off in our brain. It's not something that is going to cease, from what I can see at this point in time. But what we do is we manage them effectively, and we go, okay, even though the one next step is challenging, I'm still going to stand up and do it. You know, I know that my body and brain may have X amount of response, but then we go, right, let's get into it, let's do it, and let's account for the response that I'm going to have. Yeah, that's right. Safe, confidential, professional, non-biased. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely critical for us, Laurel. You're right. And yes, yep, your faith kept you alive. Yeah. And look, honestly, our faith, when it's experienced, is so deep and so nourishing that I know I wouldn't have gotten through life without my faith. There's just no way. I was driving down to have acupuncture today and I went, you know what? I went through the fire and Jesus walked with me. And people wouldn't understand that if they haven't had it. But I walked through the fire and I'm here to do what I'm here to do, and that's great. And I feel really good that I've done it because I know no matter what else comes in life, I'll manage it. I can manage it no matter what, because we've certainly seen the worst of it in the hardest of times. To take 11 years to get here is a pretty significant journey. And for me, I don't want anyone to ever, ever, ever have to do this journey alone, ever. Because I did it alone. I did it without answers for a lot of years. And it took me a long time to feel comfortable to even talk to people about it, because I couldn't really talk about it because I didn't know what to say. What do you say? I have a brain injury, but I can't explain all the other stuff? No. But now I can actually say, look, this is what's happening in my brain. This is what's happening at the unconscious level. This is what's out of my control until I know it's happening, and then I can begin to wrap both hands around it. Laurel says, I stay in therapy. I told my twins to stay in therapy for the rest of their lives. As long as the therapist is helping them set goals and meet those goals. I've met too many people who go to therapists and see a therapist for 10 years and then wonder why the therapist says, I can't do this anymore. The therapist with complex trauma, the therapist needs to be setting goals, and we need information to integrate into our day-to-day life. Because of the trauma happening, for most of us, look, most people you talk to, it happened pre-verbal, okay? We need to be able to say, right, I need you to educate me as well as set goals and then help me see what I can't see. Because when our prefrontal cortex is offline, one of the things that we don't have access to is perception. So if I can't see what I can't see, I need somebody that I can trust that's going to be kind and gentle with me and say, hey, can you see this? And then you have those people around you that you trust that will do that, okay? And the more I learn about the prefrontal cortex and what it does, the more it is so imperative. Get trauma-informed movement into you. And, as one of the ladies in group who's done it for 6 months says, it's just changed her life. And it does. We need to get back to that and get to help our brain get online. Okay, it's like we've had an app missing. If we had 10 apps in our brain, we need that one app back online in order to help us move forward. Otherwise, the emotional side of things is repetitive, absolutely, because you've not got the ability to process it. Okay, so I know that was a big long answer and I need to go and get tomorrow's class ready. Well, finish getting tomorrow's class ready. So thank you, Laurel. Thank you for joining in, and I will see you all my morning and your evening, and Laurel, grab some sleep. Okay, blessings and dreams.